The ambulance's sirens howled through the night, flashing red and blue as it sped down the lonely highway. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the cool desert wind brushing against the vehicle. Paramedics Jake and Laura sat in tense silence, their minds focused on the emergency call they had just received. Then, out of nowhere, a wild Mustang appeared. Jake slammed the brakes. The tires screeched against the asphalt as the massive horse stood defiantly in the middle of the road, muscles tense, nostrils flaring. It wouldn't move. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, gripping the wheel. The Mustang pawed at the ground, snorting, its dark eyes locked onto them. It wasn't acting like a typical spooked animal. There was no wild panic in its movements, just urgency. Laura reached for the radio. "Dispatch, we've got a wild horse blocking the road. We might need assistance." Before she could finish, the Mustang let out a sharp, desperate whinny. It turned, trotting a few steps off the road, then looked back at them, as if it wanted them to follow. Jake frowned. "Did that horse just signal us?" Laura's heart pounded. This wasn't normal. A wild horse wouldn't just stop traffic, let alone try to lead an ambulance. Then, in the still night air, a faint sound reached them, a cry. Laura held her breath. It was distant, weak, but unmistakable. Someone, something, was out there, needing help. The Mustang whinnied again, stomping its hooves. It was begging them to follow. Jake hesitated, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The emergency call they had received was miles away. They had no time for distractions. But something about this felt wrong. "We have to go," Laura said, her voice firm. Jake exhaled sharply. "We could lose our jobs for this." Laura met his gaze. "And if we don't, someone could die." For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with a determined nod, Jake shifted gears. The Mustang turned, galloping into the darkness. And the ambulance followed. Final line, whatever was out there, it had to be important. And they were about to find out why. The ambulance rumbled off the paved highway, its tires crunching over gravel as it followed the Mustang into the darkness. Jake kept both hands firm on the wheel, his jaw clenched. This was against every rule in the book. Paramedics didn't chase after wild animals. But something about this felt bigger than a simple detour. The Mustang moved with purpose, trotting ahead but glancing back often to make sure they were still following. Its powerful muscles rippled beneath its dark coat, and despite the erratic path, it never slowed down. Laura leaned forward, gripping the dashboard. "It's leading us somewhere." "But where?" Jake didn't answer. He could barely see more than a few feet ahead, just the rhythmic flash of their headlights bouncing off the horse's sleek body. Everything about this was surreal. Then, in the distance, a structure emerged from the darkness. An old wooden fence, broken in several places, stretched across the land like brittle bones. Beyond it, the land dipped into an open field, where an abandoned barn sagged under the weight of time. The air smelled damp, tinged with the faint scent of rotting wood. The Mustang picked up speed as they neared the fence. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Jake hit the brakes. The ambulance jolted to a standstill, sending a puff of dust into the air. The Mustang stood completely still now, its ears flicking toward the barn. It let out a soft, whimpering sound, a noise Jake had never heard from a horse before. Then, from the barn, a sound. A faint, weak cry. Laura's pulse spiked. "Did you hear that?" Jake threw the ambulance into park and grabbed his flashlight. "Yeah. And I don't like it." They stepped out, the night air biting against their skin. The barn loomed over them like a sleeping beast, its wooden frame cracked and brittle. The Mustang snorted, pacing anxiously near the entrance. It stomped the ground, kicking up dirt. Then, they saw the tracks. Laura's flashlight skimmed across the ground. Hoof prints, small ones. Leading to the barn, but never leaving. "Oh, no," Laura whispered. "There's a foal in there." Jake's stomach twisted. It all made sense now. The Mustang wasn't just a wild horse, it was a mother. And she had stopped their ambulance because her baby was in trouble. Without another word, they ran inside. The barn was a mess of collapsed beams and tangled debris. The smell of damp hay and old wood filled the air. Their flashlights cut through the dust, scanning for any sign of movement. Then, a soft whimper. Jake whirled around. There, beneath a fallen wooden beam, was the foal. It was barely moving, its tiny body covered in dirt and sweat. Its breathing was shallow, its legs trembling. It had been trapped here for who knows how long, and it was running out of time. Laura dropped to her knees, reaching for the foal's head. "Shoo, baby. We're here." The foal let out a faint cry, too weak to move. The mother Mustang neighed frantically from outside, pacing back and forth. She wanted to get in, but the space was too tight. Jake ran his hands over the fallen beam, testing its weight. It was too heavy. The foal wouldn't be able to escape unless they moved it. Laura's eyes were already filled with fear. "Jake, we need to hurry. He's not going to last much longer." Jake swallowed hard. He knew she was right. But there was another problem. That wooden beam? It was unstable. If they moved it the wrong way, the entire barn could come down on them. He took a deep breath. They had one shot. "On 3, he said, planting his feet. "We lift together." Laura nodded, hands steady. 1, 2. They tightened their grip. 3. With every ounce of strength, they heaved the beam up. It groaned against the shift, debris crumbling down from the rafters. Dust filled the air, making it hard to see. The foal let out a weak cry and crawled forward. "Come on, baby," Laura whispered. The foal wobbled, stumbling onto its shaky legs. It took one step, then another. And then, the entire barn creaked. Jake's heart slammed against his ribs. The weight shift had disturbed the already weak structure. The roof above them trembled, threatening to collapse. "We gotta go, now." Laura scooped the foal into her arms, its small body warm against hers. Jake grabbed her wrist and they ran. The Mustang whinnied outside, its cries frantic. With one final push, they burst out of the barn just as part of the roof came crashing down behind them. A cloud of dust exploded into the air. Jake and Laura stumbled forward, gasping for breath. The foal lay still in Laura's arms, but it was breathing. The mother Mustang neighed, stepping forward, nudging its baby with its nose. The foal stirred, letting out a soft, fragile cry. Jake exhaled, hands on his knees. They had saved it. But there was one problem. The foal was too weak to walk. And in the middle of nowhere, with no vet for miles. They had no idea how to keep it alive. Final line, Laura turned to Jake. "We have an ambulance, don't we?" Laura clutched the tiny foal in her arms, feeling its frail body tremble against her. Its breaths were shallow, each one weaker than the last. The mother Mustang hovered close, nudging her baby, letting out soft, desperate whinnies. Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead, his mind racing. They had saved the foal, but now what? They were miles from the nearest vet. The foal was too weak to stand, and without immediate care, it wouldn't survive the night. Laura looked up at him, eyes filled with urgency. "Jake, we have an ambulance. We need to take it with us." Jake hesitated. "We transport people, Laura. Not animals." Laura shot him a glare. "Are you seriously telling me you're going to let this baby die just because it's not human?" Jake clenched his jaw. He had always followed the rules. But tonight? The rules didn't matter. He exhaled sharply. Get in. We'll figure it out on the way. Laura wasted no time. She carefully carried the foal toward the back of the ambulance, the mother Mustang following, her every step filled with worry. Jake opened the rear doors, and they gently laid the foal on a blanket. It let out a weak, shuddering breath. The mother Mustang pawed at the ground, her large, dark eyes darting between her baby and the humans trying to help. She wants to come, Laura whispered. Jake looked at the towering horse, then back at the small, confined space of the ambulance. Yeah, well, that's not happening. The Mustang let out a sharp neigh and took a step forward. Oh, she's coming, Laura muttered. Jake groaned. This is insane. But there was no time to argue. He shut the doors, climbed into the driver's seat, and fired up the engine. The mother Mustang trotted alongside as they pulled away, refusing to let her baby out of her sight. Jake tightened his grip on the wheel. They had to move fast. The first signs of trouble. Laura monitored the foal's breathing, her fingers pressing gently against its tiny chest. His heartbeat is slowing. Jake's stomach twisted. How bad? Bad. He pressed harder on the gas, the ambulance bouncing over the rough dirt road. The mother Mustang galloped beside them, her powerful strides keeping pace with the vehicle. Then, up ahead, Jake spotted a problem. A fallen tree blocked the road. He slammed the brakes. Laura braced herself, gripping the foal to keep it steady. You have got to be kidding me. Jake threw the ambulance into park and jumped out. The tree was massive, its thick branches tangled like outstretched arms. There was no way around it. We need to move it, Jake said, rolling up his sleeves. Laura stared at him. You want to move that? Are you secretly Superman? Jake ignored her, walking toward the trunk. He pressed his hands against the bark and pushed. Nothing. The thing didn't budge. Laura groaned. We don't have time for this. The mother Mustang let out an impatient snort, pacing in circles. The foal's breathing was growing weaker. And then, the Mustang did something unexpected. She trotted up beside Jake and, without hesitation, began pushing the tree with her head. Jake blinked. Are you seeing this? Laura's jaw dropped. The Mustang kept pushing, using all her strength. Her muscles rippled, nostrils flaring. She let out a loud, determined grunt, then, suddenly, the tree shifted. Jake scrambled to help, digging his feet into the dirt. With one final heave, the massive trunk rolled just enough to clear a path. They had a way through. Laura turned back to check the foal. Its eyes were closing. We have to go, now. Jake didn't waste another second. They jumped back into the ambulance, sped forward, and burst onto the open road. The mother Mustang galloped alongside them, her head held high. But deep in Jake's gut, something still felt wrong. A chilling realization. They were barely a few miles from the nearest vet when Laura gasped. Jake, something's not right. He flicked a glance in the rearview mirror. What now? She leaned closer to the foal, pressing her fingers against its side. Then she looked up, her face pale. The foal's heartbeat is slowing too fast. Jake's hands clenched around the wheel. We're almost there. No, Jake. It's not just weak. Something else is wrong. He gritted his teeth. Like what? Laura hesitated. Then, her eyes flicked to the mother Mustang, still running beside them. What if it's not just exhaustion? What if it was poisoned? Jake's blood ran cold. That barn had been abandoned for years. Who knew what kind of toxic plants or chemicals were in there? The foal had been trapped inside for hours. It hadn't just been weak. It was dying. We need to call the vet. Now. Laura grabbed the radio, but static filled the line. No signal. Jake's heart pounded. They were running out of time. The mother Mustang let out a desperate cry, her hooves thundering against the ground. Jake swallowed hard. He wasn't going to let this foal die. They had only one option left, and it was a risk they couldn't afford to lose. Final line, Jake tightened his grip on the wheel. Hold on, little guy. We're not losing you. Jake's hands were slick with sweat as he gripped the wheel. The foal's breathing was growing shallower, each exhale more fragile than the last. Laura was doing everything she could, adjusting the foal's position, gently pressing against its tiny chest, whispering reassurances, but they were losing him. And they were still miles from the vet. The mother Mustang galloped alongside them, her breath labored, her dark eyes filled with desperation. She whinnied loudly, as if urging them to go faster. Laura pressed 2 fingers against the foal's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was faint. Jake, I don't think he's gonna make it. Jake's jaw clenched. No. He's gonna make it. Laura shook her head. Not if we don't do something now. Jake cursed under his breath. They needed a miracle. Then, up ahead, another problem. A steep incline loomed in the distance, cutting through the trees. The road was narrow, winding, dangerous, especially at this speed. Jake's pulse spiked. If they slowed down, they'd lose the foal. But if they took that hill too fast? He had no choice. With a deep breath, he gritted his teeth and gunned the engine. The ambulance lurched forward, tires skidding against loose gravel. Laura braced herself, shielding the foal with her arms as the vehicle climbed higher and higher. The mother Mustang never stopped running. She kept up, her powerful legs pushing through the strain. But she was tiring. Jake glanced in the side mirror, her strides were faltering. She let out a shrill, panicked cry. And suddenly, her legs gave out. Jake's heart plummeted. He slammed the brakes, throwing the ambulance into park. Laura's head snapped up. What are you doing? We don't have time. Jake ignored her. He flung open the door and ran. The mother Mustang had collapsed just a few feet behind them, her chest heaving. She tried to stand, tried to force herself forward, but her legs wouldn't hold her. Come on, girl, Jake whispered, kneeling beside her. Not now. She was too exhausted. Too desperate to save her baby. She had pushed herself too far. Laura ran up beside him, still holding the foal. Jake, we can't stay here. The baby needs help. Jake swallowed hard. He looked at the foal, then at the mother. And he made a decision. They were taking them both. A desperate gamble. Jake sprinted back to the ambulance, yanking the back doors open. Get the foal inside, he ordered. Laura hesitated, then did as he said, gently placing the weak baby back onto the blankets. Jake turned back to the Mustang. She was still trying to stand, her body trembling from exhaustion. You're not staying behind, he murmured. He moved beside her, placing his hands against her strong, sweat-slickened body. Come on, girl. One more time. The Mustang let out a weak breath. Then, she moved. With every ounce of strength, she forced herself up. Jake stepped back, watching as she staggered toward the ambulance. He didn't have to guide her. She knew where she needed to go. Laura's eyes widened. Jake, she's getting in. The mother Mustang climbed inside, her legs shaking, and collapsed beside her baby. Jake didn't wait. He slammed the doors shut, jumped into the driver's seat, and floored the gas. The ambulance tore up the hill, racing toward the vet. There was no turning back now. The final hurdle. Laura's hands shook as she checked the foal's breathing. It's still too weak, she whispered. The vet clinic was still minutes away, minutes the foal didn't have. Jake's mind raced. He knew basic human first aid, but what about a horse? Then, a memory flickered in his mind. Shock. In human patients, shock could shut down the body if blood flow wasn't regulated. Could it be the same for the foal? Jake glanced at Laura. Try elevating his legs. What? Just do it. Laura quickly adjusted the foal, propping its back legs up on a rolled-up blanket. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a flicker of movement. The foal's chest rose, stronger. Laura gasped. It's working. Jake's hands clenched the wheel. They had bought time, but not much. The vet clinic's lights appeared in the distance, glowing like a beacon of hope. Jake pressed the gas pedal to the floor. Hold on, little guy, he murmured. Just a little longer. The ambulance screeched to a stop in front of the vet clinic, its tires kicking up dust. Jake barely had time to throw it into park before Laura flung open the back doors. The mother Mustang whinnied weakly, nudging her baby. The foal's breathing was still too shallow, too slow. The clinic's main doors burst open. A middle-aged veterinarian, Dr. Collins, rushed out, his eyes widening at the sight. What the? He started, but Laura cut him off. No time. The foal's dying. Dr. Collins snapped into action, waving them inside. Bring him in, now. Jake and Laura scrambled to lift the fragile foal. The mother Mustang tried to follow, but her legs buckled, and she collapsed just outside the ambulance. She's exhausted, Jake said, panic rising in his throat. She ran too hard to get him here. Dr. Collins looked between them, assessing fast. Get the foal on the table. I'll check the mother next. Jake hesitated, but there was no time to argue. He and Laura rushed the foal inside, laying it down under the clinic's bright fluorescent lights. The little body barely moved. Dr. Collins pressed a stethoscope to the foal's chest, his expression darkening. Its heartbeat is weak. Too weak. Jake's stomach twisted. Can you save him? Dr. Collins didn't answer immediately. Instead, he grabbed a syringe filled with adrenaline. This will give him a fighting chance. He injected the foal carefully, his movements precise. The room was dead silent as everyone waited. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a tiny gasp. Laura clutched Jake's arm. He's breathing. But Dr. Collins didn't look relieved. The foal lost a lot of blood. He's weak. Too weak. Jake's pulse pounded. What does that mean? Dr. Collins exhaled, turning toward the mother Mustang still collapsed outside. He needs a transfusion. Fast. Laura's brow furrowed. From who? Dr. Collins didn't hesitate. His mother. Silence filled the room. Jake's chest tightened. What? The foal lost too much blood while trapped, Dr. Collins explained. He needs a transfusion, and his mother is the best match. But. Jake's stomach dropped. But? Dr. Collins hesitated. If she gives too much, she might not survive. The words hit like a gut punch. Jake turned to Laura, but she already looked shattered. They had come so far, and now they had to make an impossible choice. Save the foal, and risk losing the mother. Jake's throat tightened. There's no other way? Dr. Collins shook his head. If we don't act now, the foal won't last another hour. The mother Mustang let out a weak, breathy whinny. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her. Still, she looked at her baby. And in that moment, Jake saw it. She understood. She nudged her foal gently, pressing her muzzle against him. A mother's love. A mother's sacrifice. Jake's vision blurred. "She's willing," Laura whispered. Jake clenched his fists. He hated this. Every part of it. Dr. Collins grabbed his equipment. "We have to move now." The mother Mustang didn't flinch as the needle slid into her neck. She lay still, her chest rising and falling slowly. Jake placed a hand against her side. "Stay with us, girl." Dr. Collins carefully transferred her blood to the foal. The minutes ticked by like eternity. The foal shuddered, its tiny legs twitching. Laura wiped her tears. "Come on, baby. Fight." Then, a tiny movement. The foal's ear flicked. Then its head lifted, just a fraction. It was working. Dr. Collins nodded. "He's stabilizing." Jake let out a slow breath. They had done it. Then, the mother Mustang's body swayed. Jake's relief vanished. Laura gasped. "She's going into shock." Dr. Collins moved fast. "We need to stop the transfusion, now." Jake's heart pounded as he watched the vet work. The mother's breaths were getting too slow. "Stay with us," Jake whispered. Dr. Collins adjusted the four, cutting the flow. "Come on, girl. Breathe." Jake's hands fisted into the fabric of his uniform. He had never felt so powerless. Silence. Then, a shaky breath. The mother Mustang's nostrils flared. Her eyes blinked open. Jake let out a sharp exhale, his body nearly collapsing from the tension. "She's okay," Dr. Collins murmured. "She's weak, but she's okay." Laura covered her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. Jake felt his throat tighten. He turned to the foal. Its tiny legs wobbled, but it stood. Jake's breath hitched. The mother, still weak, slowly lifted her head. Her eyes found her baby. And despite everything, despite the pain, the exhaustion, she nudged him. A mother's love had saved her child. Jake swallowed hard, blinking back his own emotions. Laura turned to him, voice shaking. "We saved them both." Jake nodded. "Yeah. We did." But deep in his heart, he knew. It wasn't them who had saved the foal. It was her. The air in the clinic was thick with tension. The foal, though weak, was stable. The mother Mustang lay beside him, her breath slow, her body motionless, but she was alive. Barely. Jake exhaled, running a hand through his damp hair. He had seen plenty of close calls in his career, but this? This was different. "She needs rest," Dr. Collins murmured, checking her vitals. "Both of them do. The next few hours are critical." Laura sat beside the foal, stroking its frail body. "We did everything we could, right?" Dr. Collins nodded. "Now, we wait." But something still didn't feel right. Jake glanced at the mother Mustang again. She should have been regaining strength, even slowly. Instead, her eyes weren't focusing. And then, the foal let out a sharp cry. Laura startled. What was that? The mother Mustang's body convulsed. Jake's stomach plummeted. Dr. Collins rushed forward, pressing a hand to her side. Her heartbeats erratic. "No, no, no," Laura whispered, gripping the foal, shielding it from the sight of its struggling mother. Dr. Collins moved fast, reaching for medical equipment. "She's going into shock. We need to stabilize her, now." Jake's mind raced. She had already given too much. She had barely anything left. If her body shut down now. He grabbed Dr. Collins' arm. "Tell me what to do." The vet didn't hesitate. "I need you to hold her steady. If she thrashes, she could make it worse." Jake dropped to his knees beside the Mustang, placing his hands firmly against her. She shuddered violently. Jake tightened his grip. "Stay with us, girl. Just a little longer." But her body kept seizing. Something was wrong. Dr. Collins frowned. "This isn't just exhaustion. This is..." A low, rumbling growl filled the air. Jake froze. Laura's breath hitched. "Did you hear that?" The foal whimpered, pressing itself against its mother's side. Dr. Collins' face drained of color. He slowly turned toward the open clinic doors. And there, just beyond the entrance, in the shadows, two glowing eyes stared back at them. Jake's blood turned ice cold. A mountain lion. It had been watching. Waiting. And now, with the Mustang too weak to fight, the foal barely able to stand, it had come to finish the job. Jake's entire body went rigid. They had been so focused on saving the foal, they never thought to check what had been hunting it in the first place. Laura clutched the foal tighter, pressing her back against the wall. Dr. Collins whispered, "Nobody move." But the mountain lion stepped forward. Its muscles tensed, its tail flicked. It was ready to pounce. Jake's mind raced. The mother Mustang wasn't strong enough to protect her baby. He had to do something. His eyes darted around the clinic. No weapons. No way to call for help. Then, he spotted something. The syringe Dr. Collins had used earlier. A sedative. It wasn't meant for predators. But right now? It was all they had. Jake moved fast. The mountain lion lunged. Jake dove forward, grabbing the syringe and jamming it into the beast's side. A deafening roar shook the clinic. The lion twisted, claws grazing Jake's arm, but he didn't let go. The sedative took effect fast. The lion's movements slowed, its legs wobbled, then, finally, it collapsed. Silence. Jake's chest heaved. Blood trickled down his arm where the lion's claws had sliced his skin. Laura let out a shaky breath. "Jake, are you okay?" He barely heard her. He turned back to the Mustang, to the foal, to the creatures they had fought so hard to save. They were still alive. But barely. Dr. Collins rushed forward, pressing a stethoscope to the Mustang's side. "She's still with us, but she's weak. We need to get fluids in her now." Jake nodded, pushing himself to his feet. His vision swam, but he didn't care. Laura grabbed his uninjured arm, steadying him. "You just fought a freaking mountain lion." He exhaled sharply. "Yeah. Add that to the list of things I never thought I'd do." The mother Mustang let out a soft, breathy whinny. It was faint, but she was alive. Jake's throat tightened. She had survived one fight. Now she had to win another. The clinic was eerily silent except for the slow, labored breathing of the mother Mustang. The foal lay curled beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. Jake pressed a towel against his bleeding arm, but his mind wasn't on himself. It was on them. The mother had fought off exhaustion. She had given her own blood to save her baby. And now, she was barely holding on. Dr. Collins worked quickly, setting up an 4-drip, his hands steady but his face lined with worry. "She's critical," he murmured. "Her vitals are weak." Jake's jaw clenched. "But she's gonna make it, right?" Dr. Collins hesitated. "She's fighting. But, she's lost too much." Laura's breath hitched. "No, she can't die now. Not after everything." Dr. Collins adjusted the 4-flow. "The only way to stabilize her is with a special equine plasma transfusion. But we don't have any here. It's not something small-town clinics keep stocked." Jake's stomach dropped. "Where can we get it?" Dr. Collins sighed. "There's a specialized equine hospital about an hour away. They'll have what we need." Laura's eyes widened. "An hour?" She doesn't have an hour. Dr. Collins nodded grimly. If we don't get that transfusion in the next 30 minutes, she won't make it. Jake refused to accept that. He turned toward Laura. We still have the ambulance. She blinked. Jake, are you serious? He looked back at the mother Mustang, at her frail body curled protectively around her foal. He wasn't letting her die. Not after all she had done. I'll drive, he said. If we push it, I can get there in 30 minutes. Dr. Collins hesitated. That's pushing it. Too much strain on her heart could kill her. Jake's hands tightened into fists. And if we do nothing? Silence. Laura swallowed hard. We're taking her. Dr. Collins exhaled. Then let's move. The race against time. Jake and Laura moved fast, carefully loading the mother Mustang back into the ambulance. This time, the foal came too. He refused to leave his mother's side, pressing against her like he could somehow will her back to life. Jake climbed into the driver's seat. Laura, you monitor her vitals. If anything changes, tell me. She nodded, already securing the foredrip. Just drive, Jake. He did. Fast. The ambulance tore down the highway, sirens wailing. The speedometer climbed past 80 miles per hour, then 90. Jake didn't care. Every second counted. Laura's voice cut through the tension. She's still with us. Jake gritted his teeth. She had to hold on. The foal let out a weak cry, nuzzling against its mother. Come on, girl, Jake muttered. You didn't fight this hard just to give up now. The breaking point. 15 minutes in, Laura's voice turned sharp. Jake, her pulse is dropping. His stomach twisted. Laura pressed her fingers against the Mustang side. She's slipping into shock again. Jake slammed the accelerator. We're almost there, he growled. Stay with us. The foal let out a desperate whimper. And then, the mother stopped breathing. The impossible decision. No, Laura whispered. No, no, no. She grabbed an oxygen mask, pressing it over the Mustang's muzzle. Come on, girl. Breathe. Jake's knuckles turned white against the wheel. How far are we? 5 minutes. Too long. Laura shook the Mustang gently. Stay with us, please. Jake's heart pounded. She had saved her baby. Now, they had to save her. Laura's hands trembled. Jake, if we don't do something now. Then, the foal moved. Jake glanced in the mirror just in time to see the tiny creature press his nose against his mother's. It was a soft, desperate gesture. A final plea. Laura gasped. The mother Mustang took a breath. Jake almost slammed on the brakes. She's breathing, Laura choked out. It's weak, but she's still here. Jake's grip tightened. Hold on, girl. We're almost there. The final stretch. The equine hospital came into view. Jake didn't slow down. The ambulance skidded to a stop just as the clinic doors burst open, vets rushing out. She needs a plasma transfusion, now. Laura shouted. The medical team moved quickly, getting the mother Mustang onto a stretcher. The foal refused to leave her side, trotting anxiously beside her. Jake and Laura stood back, watching. Waiting. Every second dragged like a lifetime. Then, finally, Dr. Collins emerged. She's stable. Jake felt his knees buckle. Laura covered her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. She's gonna make it? Dr. Collins nodded. She's weak, but yes. She'll make it. The foal let out a tiny, relieved cry, pressing against his mother's side. Jake let out a slow breath, exhaustion slamming into him. Laura looked at him, shaking her head in disbelief. "We did it." Jake exhaled. "No." He looked at the Mustang, the warrior who had risked everything for her child. "She did it." The sterile air of the equine hospital carried a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The mother Mustang lay still, hooked to and fore, her body finally resting after the fight of her life. The foal curled beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling in deep, peaceful breaths. Jake stood just outside the stall, his arms crossed over his chest. His uniform was stained with sweat, dirt, and dried blood, not all of it his own. But they had made it. Laura sat on the ground beside him, her back against the wooden stall wall. "She really did it," she murmured. "She actually made it." Jake exhaled. "Yeah." Dr. Collins approached, rubbing his temples. "The transfusion worked. She'll need time to recover, but she's going to be okay." Jake nodded, but something still weighed on him. "What happens now?" he asked. Dr. Collins sighed. "She's a wild horse. Once she's strong enough, she'll be released back into her herd." Jake frowned. "And the foal?" Dr. Collins hesitated. "That's complicated." Laura sat up. "What do you mean?" "The foal is too weak," Dr. Collins admitted. "Even with his mother alive, he might not survive out there. He needs proper care, food, protection." Jake's stomach twisted. He already knew what Dr. Collins was going to say. "If we send them back into the wild too soon, he won't make it." Laura's face paled. "So, what are you saying? We keep him?" Dr. Collins shrugged. "There's a sanctuary that could take him in. But separating him from his mother," he sighed. "It's not ideal. But we might not have a choice." Jake's jaw clenched. After everything they had fought for, after everything she had sacrificed, now they had to decide whether to separate them. His gut told him it was wrong. And then, the mother Mustang moved. Slowly, she turned her head, her eyes locking onto Jake. It was only for a moment. But in that moment, something in Jake's chest tightened. She knew. She understood. And just like before, she wasn't fighting. She was accepting. Jake turned back to Dr. Collins. "What if we gave them time?" Dr. Collins raised an eyebrow. "Time?" "Just a few weeks," Jake said. "Give the foal time to get stronger. Let them stay together. And when he's ready, we let them go." Dr. Collins considered it. "That's possible." Laura's expression softened. "We can make sure they're both strong before they go back." Dr. Collins nodded. "It won't be easy. But if you're willing to help, I can arrange it." Jake didn't hesitate. "We're doing it." The weeks that followed. Time passed, and the Mustang recovered faster than anyone expected. Each day, Jake and Laura checked in, watching as she regained her strength. The foal, too, grew stronger, his legs sturdier, his steps bolder. But no matter how strong he got, he never strayed far from his mother. Jake knew the day would come when they had to let them go. And he wasn't ready for it. One evening, as the sun cast golden streaks across the sky, Jake leaned against the stall. The mother Mustang watched him carefully. "You know you gotta go back soon, don't you?" he murmured. She flicked her ears. Jake let out a soft chuckle. "You've been through hell, girl." He stepped closer, reaching a hand out. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she pressed her nose against his palm. Jake swallowed hard. This wasn't just a horse. This was a fighter. A mother. A survivor. And he wasn't ready to say goodbye. The hardest goodbye. The morning of their release was quiet. Too quiet. Jake stood by the open pasture gate, watching as the Mustang and her foal stood side by side. Laura stood beside him. "You okay?" Jake forced a smirk. "I should be asking you that." She exhaled. "I don't know how to feel." Neither did he. They had fought so hard to keep them alive. And now, they had to let them go. Jake took a step forward, looking at the mother Mustang one last time. She met his gaze. She knew. Jake reached up, running a hand down her strong neck. "Go on, girl." The Mustang let out a low, quiet sound. Then, she turned. The foal hesitated for only a second before following. Jake watched as they galloped into the wild. His throat tightened. Laura wiped her eyes. "They're free." Jake nodded, watching them disappear into the open land. He should have felt happy. Instead, all he felt was an ache in his chest. Because he knew. Some goodbyes lasted forever, the pasture was empty now. Only the soft whisper of the wind and the golden glow of the rising sun remained. The mother Mustang and her foal had vanished beyond the horizon, back where they belonged. Jake stood by the open gate, his hands resting on the wooden post. His heart felt full, yet strangely hollow. It was over. Laura exhaled beside him, wiping her eyes. "I didn't think it would be this hard." Jake forced a chuckle. "You crying, Miller?" She shot him a look. "Shut up." He smirked, but the truth was, he felt it too. A deep, aching loss. The mother Mustang had fought against every odd, had risked everything to save her foal. And now, she was gone. They had done the right thing. They had given her back her freedom. But somehow, it still didn't feel like enough. Jake glanced down at his arm, 3 thin scars stretched across his skin where the mountain lion had swiped at him that night. He had nearly died for them. And yet, he would have done it all again. Some things were just worth fighting for. A message from the wild. 2 weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Jake and Laura went back to their shifts, back to human emergencies, back to a world where saving lives usually meant sirens, hospitals, and 4 drips. But nothing felt the same. Every now and then, Jake found himself glancing out the window, wondering where they had gone. Wondering if they were okay. Then, one morning, something happened. Jake and Laura had just finished a long night shift and were heading out to their cars when a distant sound caught their ears. A low, familiar whinny. Jake froze. He turned slowly, his pulse quickening. And there, standing just beyond the tree line, was the mother Mustang. Laura gasped. "No way." The foal stood beside her, taller now, stronger. His legs no longer wobbled. But what sent chills down Jake's spine was the way the Mustang was looking at them. She had come back. Just for a moment. Jake took a slow step forward, his breath catching. She held his gaze. A silent acknowledgement. A thank you. A goodbye. Jake's throat tightened. "Go on, girl," he whispered. "You're free." The Mustang's ears flicked. She let out one last soft sound, then, with one powerful movement, she turned. And just like that, she and her foal disappeared into the wild once more. And just like that, she and her foal disappeared into the wild once more. Laura exhaled shakily. "Did that just?" Jake swallowed. "Yeah." They stood in silence, the weight of the moment settling in. Then Laura nudged him. "You're gonna miss her, aren't you?" Jake let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah. I really am." The life lesson. That night, as Jake sat alone on his porch, he thought about the Mustang. About what she had taught him. It wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just about strength. It was about love. A mother's love. The kind that never gives up. The kind that fights, sacrifices, and endures, even when the odds are impossible. The kind that asks for nothing in return. Jake had spent years saving lives. But in the end, it wasn't about how many rules you followed, or how many calls you answered. It was about the ones you refused to give up on. And sometimes, the ones who saved you weren't human at all.